Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today we're looking at a budget-friendly electric vehicle because as enthusiasts, everybody asks us what they should buy. So it's easy to spend your friend's money all day long when they say, hey, I've got 100 or 200 grand to go buy a Porsche or a Ferrari. I can option out your Porsche and add 100 grand to your 911 any day of the week for fun. But most of us are not doing that. Most of us have friends who are saying, hey, look, I really need a new car. My Subaru, my Volvo, my Chevy, it's on its last legs, and I would like to get into an electric car or something efficient with some amenities, because the reality is the days of stick shifts, roll-up windows, and manual locks are pretty much long dead and over, for better or worse. You know, that'd be kind of a cool thing to have once in a while. But now a lot of sort of normal consumers who are not necessarily enthusiasts are simply looking for a good quality, efficient car that isn't going to break the bank. If you're not a car enthusiast, spending $100,000 on a car isn't very much fun. And this is where Chevy comes into play, because Chevrolet, sure, they can absolutely spend your money when you get into a high trim level Suburban or a Duramax diesel HG truck. Absolutely. But what I think Chevy does best is shine in the lower end of the market. And that is where this EV Equinox comes into play. Now, the Equinox in your brain may not seem like, ooh, I want an Equinox. Honestly, I think it's interesting they use the Equinox name here. It has cachet, but to me, Equinox was always sort of a budget-friendly SUV, small SUV, and I never saw them as really high-end. But with the EV Equinox, this is its own platform. It's an Ultium platform vehicle, and they still do make a gas-powered Equinox, but this is not that. So first, let's take a look around. What do we have here? This is a 2LT version. It starts just under $45,000. And if you're thinking, hey, that's not cheap enough, I'm looking for like a cheap car. Remember two things. Number one, they qualify for the $7,500 tax credit. So you can take $7,500 off of that price. And two, for 2025, there's going to be a 1LT version, which is a little more of a stripper model, but it will start at $35,000, meaning you're in it for the high 20s after the tax credit. And these come in both front wheel and all-wheel drive powertrains. So this one being a front wheel drive powertrain knocks quite a bit of price off of it, because you add somewhere around $5,000 when you go to the all-wheel drive. But remember, there's compromises with EVs. They both have the same 85 kilowatt hour battery pack. Now, if you're not an EV person and that means nothing to you, kilowatt hours equals capacity. So 85 kilowatt hours is how many gallons of gas you would have in a ICE vehicle, in an internal combustion engine. So when you're looking at that, you're trying to see, well, how much range do I have? In the front wheel drive version, you get 319 miles of range. In the all-wheel drive version, you lose a little bit, 288. Now, I don't know what that necessarily looks like in the real world. It is winter. It is cold here right now. We're probably going to lose a little bit of that 319 mile range, but I do believe that when you're looking for EVs, 300 is the sweet spot. When you have 300 miles of range, that's where this gets a lot easier to live with, especially if you're a first-time EV buyer and you're not trying to thread the needle on getting down to the low realms of your battery pack on a road trip. Appearance-wise, I think this thing drives and looks a lot smaller than it really is. This is a CUV. It's supposed to be sort of like the Chevy Trax of EVs, but the reality is this has so much space. It's very cargo-friendly. Oh, look at that. The press people even left me a nice little ice scraper. I appreciate that. Down here, you've got your cargo floor, and you can lift this up. Plenty of space. I love it when they put cubbies like this in here, because when you put groceries or things that might spill or get ugly and you don't want it ever to get on carpet and you just don't want to have to clean it up if things go sideways, I do like having that ability. Those fold down and you have pretty decent size. Let's see if this will open for me. That'd be nice. Pretty decent legroom and size rear seats. These look relatively comfortable. And look at that, tons of legroom. Now that's in my seating position. I'm not particularly tall at about 5'9", but still, I mean, that has a long way to go before it starts to impact me in a negative way. And look at this, okay? If you have been shopping for Honda Civics, this is remarkable, because you have two USB-C charging ports down here, one for each of your outboard passengers, and you get HVAC stuff, you get vents in the rear. That's not something you get on a Honda Civic, and people never let me forget that in these reviews. Up front, Pretty simple setup, but you got all my junk in the in the passenger footwell. Sorry about that. But this is getting really familiar to us in the GM world. We know what these displays look like. We know we're not getting Apple CarPlay. So that may dissuade some people from this right off the bat. And look, that is what it is. If you need Apple CarPlay, I prefer it. But GM has gone to this Google setup, and if you adapt to it, it's really fine. I don't think it's that big a deal. What I like about this too is when you get these sort of like strippery models, you can get it without a sunroof, a slick top. Some people like this, some people don't. I prefer a sunroof, but I understand if you really want to keep a car for a long time, or if you live in an area and you hate cleaning cars, that you're going to get all kinds of tree debris and stuff. Sometimes they do end up leaking or getting clogged, and it is a pain. It's an additional maintenance item. You don't need to have it. However, I did take this out last night to a meteor shower, the Geminid, is that how you say it? The Geminid meteor shower? You look up at Gemini and that's where the meteors are. And I actually was like, man, it would have been nice to have a sunroof because then I would have been able to look up and not simply out. That is also power closing. We like that. This one is space gray metallic, but really, this is kind of a fascinating color. I did not expect that to be the name of it. It's sort of purple, it's sort of pink. It changes color in a chameleon sort of fashion, which is absolutely fascinating for the price because that doesn't, I don't think, cost any extra on the car. If this was a Porsche, a color like this, oh my God, you'd probably pay $17,000 for that. So I think for what you're getting for the money for after tax credits under $40,000, a little over 35 grand, this is a really good deal. But none of it matters if it doesn't drive well. And you can pick and choose your trims, whether you get the 2LT, the 3LT, the RSs. Honestly, I'm looking at those. There's not a whole lot of price difference between them. And I think it's almost more confusing than anything else. Really what you're choosing, in my opinion, when I see this, is you're choosing what your car is going to look like. You're choosing the wheels, you're choosing the front fascia, and that's fine. I like options, but sometimes it's a little too option heavy. Gluing us to the road on a 19-inch wheel is a 245 section tire with plenty of sidewall. This is what I would want. It's impressive that you have this much sidewall on a 19-inch tire. But also look at this, 6 lugs. That's where you start to realize, even though it's only an 85 kilowatt hour battery pack, still going to be a bit heavy. Inside, that color starts to translate into trim pieces, so you start seeing a little bit of this. Now, that might not be up everybody's alley, but I'm sure you can tone that down if that's not for you. These chairs are really comfortable. I'm pretty into that, and I'm going to get this thing started up. Now, one of the features that I really like about this car is that it has a double tap auto start thing from the key fob. Sorry, that's the license. The Smoking Tire podcast. Okay. Anyway, you can hit this from your house if you need to start the car. Now, why would you need to start a car not warming up the oil? Well, it has a heated steering wheel. It has heated seats, 3-level heated seats, and I love that it's just a heat pump. So I don't feel really guilty about this sort of idling, quote unquote, in my driveway for a little bit because I'm not wasting any fuel. I'm not making any noise. It's just quietly making the car more comfortable for me in a matter of minutes because I don't need oil and coolant to get up to temperature. So that's actually a really nice feature of this vehicle. But none of it matters if it doesn't drive well because you can't recommend a car that doesn't drive well. So let's get out and see how it operates. Now this one has the $2,700 option, which gives you Super Cruise. You don't have to do that, but that is a pretty significant upgrade from what seemingly feels like a sort of base-ish car in certain ways. And I think that's what I really liked about the Chevy Bolt. A couple points against it for its design are these A-pillars. They take away a lot of visibility, and they put the little glass over there, which is fine for the passenger side, but this glass almost never does me any good unless I kind of move like this. This is a lot of blind spot here. And in typical just straight on driving, not a huge deal, but when you're making tight maneuvers, especially when it's dark out and things, this really does become a bit cumbersome. And that rear quarter, you miss it almost like you would on a mid-engine supercar. So it's great that you've got that glass on the door, but you are missing a pretty good blind spot over there. So make sure that you've got your mirrors set up properly when you are driving this thing. Let's get her off the line in all of its front wheel drive glory after some traffic passes. Ready? Get it straightened out and hit it. It's not alarmingly fast, but it is absolutely suitable for the family car or for someone who's just not a diehard enthusiast who needs that speed. I think it's wrong that we're giving everybody electric cars with 5, 6, 7, sometimes 800 horsepower for very little money and no additional licensing. It's crazy that you could have a normal, $50,000 to $60,000 family car with 800 horsepower. Do you really want to give your child the equivalent of a wheel-standing Chevelle with a blower? Probably not, but that's what you're doing when you give your kid a Model 3 Performance. It's bananas. So this makes for an entry-level car for certain people, a city car for other people, but also a car that you can give to your kids and not think like, oh boy, Timmy's going to be doing 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds like you would in the Plaid. Not a great call. This being a 2024 model year makes about 213 horsepower, and in the all-wheel drive version, it makes 288. I believe those numbers are going up to 220 and 300 respectively for 2025. So not a massive upgrade or change, but it's something, and I think that this is the sweet spot. Even the GM PR people said, hey, the last time you drove one of these, it was the faster one, so just keep that in mind for context. I'm like, good, give me the slowest stuff you've got. Look, trust me, I want to go drive a ZR1. If you're on the Chevy PR team and you're like, hey, who are we invited to come to a racetrack to drive a ZR1? Yes, please put me on that list. I like Corvettes and I want to go fast. But I think in the consumer market for like sort of normal Chevrolets, for normal people, they thrive in the lower end. They thrive at their base levels. I think a base level Chevy offers so much for the money, and I think a lot of people overlook those things. So that's why I want to highlight what this can do. So let's get out to the highway, and then we're going to tackle a few little back roads. Before we jump onto the highway, we're going to have to stop here. And I want to highlight one little complaint about this, because the suspension sometimes gets a little bouncy. It's just on that stop. You've got to be a little gentle on the brakes. You do adapt to that. That's something that I think is just a systemic problem with a static suspension, non-adaptive, on a heavier car, because you've got to try to spring and damp the thing for a lot of weight. So it's like being an unloaded pickup truck. It's just going to be a little bit stiff. But let's get on the highway. Now, when I get in the sports cars, I'm always trying to find just empty roads, hit it as hard as I can, show off what they're capable of. But I really don't think that's the purpose of this car. I think this is it. You're driving into traffic. You're doing a commute, and I want to show what that looks like in real life for you instead of some fantasized, commercialized version of that. There is a little bit of wind noise in the cabin. Got all the windows up, but it's not bad and it's not loud at all. You're just going to be aware that you're out in the world. That's fine. This is not the Lyriq. This is not the Cadillac. So it's to be expected. And now we've got Super Cruise. And it's going to be a not self-driving car, but a hands-free driving experience. Meaning, I can take my hands off the wheel. This is not like those other systems, which requires your hands to be on the wheel or give it a little bit of feedback to let you know it's there. This will actually drive on hundreds of thousands of miles of American roadways without your interaction. But you are still liable as far as I know. So don't fully trust the system, because if it gets in an accident, you're still paying the insurance premium. GM's not coming and saying, hey, we crashed your car. No, you still crashed your own car. So you got to be aware. That's just kind of true for all of these systems going forward for now. But what this does is take a lot of fatigue out of driving. I'm not saying these are absolutely necessary systems, but if you're someone who does a lot of highway miles in annoying traffic or stop and go traffic, that can be really troublesome. Now it's saying to take control. It didn't do the auto lane change for me. There's nobody near me, so I'm not totally sure why it saw that as a problem or a threat, but it didn't like it. But otherwise, I mean, look, we're very familiar with Super Cruise. If this is your first time seeing Super Cruise, like, wow, you have not been looking at cars for a long time. But I'm pretty familiar with the system. I'm happy with it. I've used it in countless GM vehicles, and I do genuinely enjoy it. It's one of my favorite self-driving systems because, like I said, it just takes away the fatigue of a long drive. But otherwise, highway manners, really chill. I like the steering in this car, especially sort of as a GT car, because sometimes what you end up with in cars that are trying to be sporty, I'm looking at the Nissan Altima right now, they get the steering a little wrong because it's twitchy or it's a little too sensitive to small inputs. And this, I feel like it's the right amount of input. It's easy to maintain your lane. It's easy to make changes and adjust. Now, let's see what it does to overtake. A little bit of body roll for that, more abrupt lane change, but nothing aggressive. And it allows for some comfort. Not a ton of power though, especially once you're at highway speed. So that sort of 65 to 80 mile an hour jump is going to take some time. But relative to what? Relative to an EV, not relative to a normal sort of economy car. I know this is $45,000 before incentives, so to say economy car is maybe a little bit of a misnomer because it's not going to compete necessarily with a Civic or Corolla with a gas engine. However, this is sort of the economy car of electric cars in America right now. This is where we're at. Now I'm going to let the car do its thing, and we're going to talk about efficiency. Now it's cold right now. It's 36 degrees. It was in the 20s this morning. I have driven this car all over with my heated seat on full blast and the heat on in the cabin. That's going to take quite a bit of efficiency away from my battery. I just reset the trip 8.7 miles ago. We're only doing 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour, which is not great. And if you want to get the full range of this 319 mile projected capacity, that's got to be north of 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So highway driving is always going to kill that a little bit. Electric vehicles do not love highway speeds. They'll be fine 65 to 70 miles an hour, but even when you start ticking over 70, aerodynamically, they do start to get a little cumbersome, and they do start to dwindle on that projected range. It's just a fact of the situation. Whereas almost the opposite is true for an internal combustion engine, where they are tuned to be very, very happy at around 70 to 75 miles per hour, and they're a lot less efficient when you're trying to play the game of stop and go traffic. EVs are good at stop and go traffic. In fact, they recover energy on the brakes, and that's a very good thing. Let's get off the highway and get on to some normal sort of country roads. Handles pretty good, honestly, and I think it's a little more eager to play in the turns than, say, a Cadillac Lyriq, which I think is really heavily focused on being a luxury car and soft, and thus is not the most direction-changing friendly vehicle, whereas this does actually feel quite a bit more playful. I also want to highlight something here. While we have direct sunlight coming in, maybe not ideal for video, but one thing that I've noticed is with this big real estate of dashboard, this starts to reflect off the glass quite a bit. And I've noticed under certain conditions that is a little bit distracting, and it can take away some of your visibility. I don't know if it's the materials, I don't know if it's the shape, I don't know if it's the angle of that windshield, but something definitely causes that to bounce off the glass. It definitely seems to deliver power with traction control based on steering angle as well. So it does a pretty good job of never giving you wheel spin or chirping tires despite going wide open throttle. Maybe you want that. I bet you could put on a heck of a smoke show with an EV front wheel drive vehicle if you wanted to, but I don't know how to override those types of control systems. But here's the thing. Equinox is a pretty well-balanced vehicle in terms of being a good, usable daily driver, but it's also relatively comfortable. This suspension does a great job of soaking things up. This is a particularly nice road. On some bumpy stuff, which we'll try to find, it might get a little bit crashy, but honestly, I thought this was going to feel stiffer, and this is why the Equinox, I think, is probably the most well-balanced thing in the lineup, even relative to the Cadillac Lyriq. The Lyriq is so soft, but that translates into slightly worse, handling performance, whereas this, it actually just feels nice and natural and predictable. Silverado EV as well. That's a really stiff vehicle, and part of it is due to the tires, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I would opt for the bigger sidewall option on this Equinox EV. But on the Silverado, having those 24-inch wheels with very little sidewall and something like 55 or more PSI in each tire, I mean, it really does translate into slightly harsher ride quality than you need. And this, it just it's all figured out. And that's why I always think that maybe this lower end in the Chevy lineup always just sort of speaks to me a little bit more. Everything just works better. The throttle mapping's fantastic. I'm never adding more or thinking, man, I wish I had more pedal travel. That's a symptom that sometimes Chevy goes a little crazy with pedal travel, and you need to really bury it to get power. Corvettes do this. Drive a C8 Corvette. You got to really push that pedal down to get into that power. This is mapped wonderfully. They've done a great job with this. And the brakes, it's regenerative braking, so it's using that regen before it's engaging pad on rotor in order to get us slow down with the most efficient stop. And I don't feel the transition between regen and actual mechanical brakes. Sure, you feel some bumps, but it's all pretty controlled and poised. Yeah, I don't love using the one pedal driving thing. I think it's too aggressive. And I mean, in traffic, I guess it makes sense, but I just think they also nailed the coast feature with regen when that's off, because sometimes these cars, they don't slow down naturally because they're like, well, you didn't want one pedal driving, so we're just going to let it ride. Well, no, this doesn't feel like that. There's a wide open throttle for a second. It's probably killing my efficiency, but honestly, I haven't been doing much to kill the efficiency. I haven't been goosing this thing. I haven't been driving it that enthusiastically. And I do need to learn what it is to drive EVs in the cold. And I know that's a different thing when it comes to energy usage and efficiency. And I really wanted that miles per kilowatt hour to be at a comfortable 3 all the time and not having to fight for it. I think the Equinox EV is so well-rounded and easy to recommend, especially in the lower trim levels where it starts to make a lot more economical sense. I don't think necessarily you should go spend the money on the top trim at high 40s or $50,000. That seems like not the point of this car. You could maybe buy something else for that money. But what I do think is if you're looking for like an economical option for an EV, this is great. And I think that sometimes people who want to buy cars get a little bit left behind if they're not enthusiasts, because the enthusiast channels are going to cater to sports cars or sporty driving, enthusiastic driving, are going to rate everything like that. Trust me, I do that. I drive lots of sporty cars. I drive lots of fun cars, and I rate them on how enjoyable they are to drive. And then you'll get metrics from other people who are going to tell you like, well, it pulls 0.88 Gs on a skid pad or something. Well, that's useless to someone who's buying an Equinox EV. But what I'm going to tell you is for somebody who drives cars all the time, all day, every day, of all types. I know what I like and what I don't like basically the second I start driving. This car feels natural, it's poised, it's enjoyable to be in, and it's pretty littered with good features for reasonable money. That's not something you can say about everybody, because let's say you get into a 3 Series BMW. I always remember when a 3 Series was like, starting at $38,000, and this is years ago, but still, a $38,000 BMW meant that you were getting nothing. You were lucky there were wheels on the thing. So by the time you actually optioned out the BMW that you wanted to drive, oh boy, you were at $50,000. So when you get it, I love the teenager in the Jeep tailgating me right here. This is great. I don't care. I'm already going a little faster than I should be here anyway. Okay, like cool it. So what's great about these sort of entry-level Chevrolets is that when you look at these trim levels, like I said, there's a couple $1,000 difference between trim levels if you're in front-wheel drive or in all-wheel drive. There's a big jump between front and all-wheel, but that's not major. You can actually get the style, color, wheel option, fascia that you want for not like another 10 grand. It's like a couple $1,000 if you've got to do it. So that just opens up this market to everybody to kind of make the thing they want work for them financially. And that's just almost unheard of. The hell was that? Okay, guess people hunting deer out here. But I sincerely hope that Chevy gets some press loaners of the 1LT, the lowest priced version of this car in 2025, because what I want to know is, can I do without the heated seats? Can I do without some of the amenities that this car has? And does it still feel the same? Does it still feel premium at that trim level? Because after tax incentives, that car is going to be like 27 grand in that neighborhood. That starts to look really appealing. And because the 2025s are already coming out, this is a 2024 model, I'm sure you can find some of these sitting on lots for incentivized pricing. So if you are looking for something like this, make sure that you're getting your money's worth and that you're taking advantage of the fact that demand, if they're sitting on the lot, is lower, and you can go snag one of a previous model year, because what I don't see is a massive differential in changes between 24 and 25. Yes, there's a little more power, and unless they like retune the suspension for 25, and if that's better, then I wouldn't really hesitate to buy the previous model year, because you're still going to get the warranty and all that good stuff. But anyway, driving this, it's a lovely car to drive. I feel connected. I don't feel like I'm going to go take it on some canyon road and thrash it, unless I was just kind of making a joke with my friends and like, yeah, let's go see what it can do. Sure, why not? That'd be fun. But I just think that this thing really hits home for someone who's looking for this car. So, hey, I may do a little road trip in this thing down the line just to see what it can do when we start really burning through this charge. Over the 30 miles of this trip, we've managed 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour. I'm not the most impressed, but I think that's more because this is me griping about EVs in general and wanting them to be more efficient rather than this particular car's capabilities. So take that with a grain of salt. Make some decisions for yourself. I'm going to end this over here under some solar panels. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive. Go listen to my podcast. I know I'm sitting here listening to Matt Farah's Smoking Tire podcast, but go listen to the Respect the Drive podcast everywhere you listen, Spotify, Apple, whatever. And check out the Patreon page if you have not already, if you want to throw a couple bucks for fuel or for charging these things up. Man, these things can be expensive to supercharge when you are not using some like membership thing. Oops, I should probably put that parking brake on, but I don't feel like I'm doing any damage to it because it's not a transmission with a parking pawl that I'm slamming against. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one. And it's absolutely worth highlighting the cameras. Chevrolet does a great job with their cameras. These are pretty high quality cameras, and you can see the side of the vehicle, right behind the vehicle. All these things just make it so much easier to position a modern car with sort of high door sills and skinny rear glass. You do need cameras now, unfortunately, due to these things, but they do a good job. I cannot say the same for Nissan. Even Honda's cameras could use a little work. My Lexus is okay, but that camera, boy oh boy, is that like the real deal. And maneuverability wise, this has a pretty great turning radius. I mean, look at this. This is nice. I was in an Ineos Grenadier the other day, and I could barely make a U-turn in a dedicated U-turn lane with 2 lanes on the other side of the road. I mean, it was really tricky, and I was like, man, that is wide. So this is fairly maneuverable.